In the earliest years of World War II, Britain faced a peril unlike any it had encountered before. The German war machine rolled through Europe with relentless efficiency, leaving nations toppled and cities occupied. Across the Channel, the British Isles remained one of the last free strongholds against the Axis. Yet survival demanded more than courage on the battlefield. It required imagination, ingenuity, and the ability to fight without being seen. The idea of deception had long existed in military thought, but the British developed it to an unprecedented scale. By 1942, as the Allies began preparing for the liberation of Europe, the necessity of misleading the enemy became clear. Every movement of men, every concentration of troops, every glimmer of armor could be observed by German reconnaissance planes or spies. If the enemy could be convinced that the strength of the British Army lay somewhere it did not, entire battles could be won before a single shot was fired. This concept gave rise to the Ghost Army, a unit not built for combat in the traditional sense, but for war by illusion. Its soldiers were trained not in the use of rifles or artillery, but in the art of perception. They learned to craft an enemy's reality, using shadows, smoke, dummies, and inflatable tanks to create the illusion of an armored division ready for battle. Each soldier became part engineer, part actor, part psychologist, and part strategist. The planning of the Ghost Army was meticulous. Headquarters mapped the southern English countryside with precision, identifying fields, ridges, and forests that could best simulate military formations. Engineers experimented with materials, canvas, rubber, and wood to produce inflatable and fake equipment that could withstand wind and rain, yet look authentic from the air. Every detail mattered: the angle of a shadow, the placement of a dummy soldier, the faint hissing of air escaping from a tank. To the German observer, these illusions had to be indistinguishable from reality. Training began in earnest. Soldiers were taught to inflate and move dummy tanks quickly, to position wooden artillery so that it cast shadows consistent with the morning sun, and to ignite smoke generators in a sequence that mimicked activity. They learned to march in formations that, when viewed from above, appeared as real units. The work was exhausting. Long nights were spent in muddy fields under cold rain, perfecting movements that would deceive the enemy. Yet morale remained high. Each soldier understood that their contribution, though unseen, could save thousands of lives in the months to come. Early exercises revealed both the brilliance and the fragility of deception. On one field, a line of inflatable tanks appeared almost lifelike from 100 meters, but a gust of wind toppled one, revealing the illusion. On another occasion, a misaligned dummy artillery piece cast a shadow in the wrong direction, threatening to betray the ruse. These failures were instructive. Each mistake was analyzed, corrected, and incorporated into the next exercise. The Ghost Army became a living experiment in the manipulation of perception. The British command understood that deception required more than static illusions. Communications had to be consistent with the illusion too. Soldiers transmitted fake radio messages, creating the impression that the units were alive, moving, and coordinating for attack. Reconnaissance photographs of these phantom divisions were circulated, adding layers of credibility. To the German High Command, these images suggested the presence of a formidable force poised for action. The Germans could not know which tanks were real, which soldiers were alive, and which positions were empty fields covered by canvas. By late 1942, the Ghost Army was ready to take the concept from training grounds to operational use. Entire fields were transformed into battlegrounds of the imagination. Inflatable Sherman tanks, plywood anti-aircraft guns and canvas trucks stood in precise formations, smoke drifting along the lines to simulate exhaust. Soldiers moved carefully among them, occasionally triggering fake artillery bursts and flares. The effect was astonishing. From the air, it appeared as if a powerful armored division stretched across the English countryside. The scale of this operation required coordination with multiple branches of the British military. Intelligence officers observed from vantage points, recording how shadows fell and how movement appeared from different angles. Engineers adjusted smoke generators to ensure visibility from aerial photographs. Every detail was scrutinized, every anomaly corrected. The Ghost Army was no longer a simple ruse, it had become a carefully choreographed performance designed to manipulate the mind of the enemy. The consequences of these early experiments were profound. German reconnaissance could not distinguish between reality and illusion, leading to misallocation of forces and strategic misjudgments. The Ghost Army demonstrated that victory in modern warfare did not always rely on brute force. Sometimes it was about controlling perception. A phantom division, if convincing enough, could achieve what an entire army could not. As the months passed, the Ghost Army continued to refine its techniques. Inflatable tanks became more realistic. Dummies were posed with greater attention to detail, and smoke patterns were timed with precision. Soldiers became experts not only in engineering, but in psychology, understanding how the enemy would interpret visual and photographic information. This combination of technical skill and human insight turned deception into a weapon as formidable as any artillery shell. In the quiet hours of dawn, the Ghost Army would prepare its fields. Inflatable tanks hissed as air escaped from valves, smoke curled from generators, and wooden dummies cast long shadows across the terrain. Soldiers moved with precision, adjusting positions, ensuring that from every angle the illusion was complete. From above, the fields seemed alive, teeming with activity. Yet the soldiers themselves remained hidden, their work invisible to all but those who understood the secret. The early successes of Britain's Ghost Army would pave the way for even larger deception operations in the years to come. Lessons learned here about shadow, perception, and the manipulation of reality would influence the Allies' campaigns across Europe. The men who worked in muddy fields, inflating fake tanks, and orchestrating smoke were part of a silent war, one fought not with bullets or bombs, but with imagination and intellect. The story of Britain's Ghost Army is a story of ingenuity under pressure, of invisible heroes whose victories were not celebrated on battlefields, but in the minds of those they deceived. It is a story of how, in a world of destruction and chaos, creativity became a weapon. Every inflated tank, every wooden gun, every carefully crafted shadow contributed to the survival of a nation and the eventual liberation of Europe. In the end, the Ghost Army demonstrated a timeless truth. Sometimes the most powerful victories are the ones no one sees, the triumphs hidden in smoke, shadow, and perception. It was a war of illusions, a battlefield of the mind, and Britain emerged victorious not only through courage and strength, but through the invisible, silent art of deception. As Britain's Ghost Army moved from planning to practice, the fields of southern England transformed into a theater of illusion. Soldiers, engineers, and officers arrived at the designated sites before dawn, their breath visible in the crisp morning air. They carried bundles of canvas, wood, and rubber, the raw materials that would become tanks, trucks, and artillery in mere moments. Each step, each placement, was choreographed to create the illusion of a fully operational armored division. The first task of the day was always inflation. Inflatable Sherman tanks, crafted from heavy-duty rubber and reinforced canvas, were carried from crates and laid out in carefully measured positions. The soldiers worked in teams, using hand pumps and mechanical devices to fill the tanks with air until they stood upright, lifelike and imposing. Mistaken for real armor from the air, these phantoms had to appear battle-ready in every detail, from turret angles to gun barrel alignment. The engineers had learned from previous exercises that even minor flaws, a collapsed wheel, an uneven surface, or a sagging canvas, could break the illusion entirely. Wooden artillery, painted in realistic colors and equipped with dummies to represent gun crews, was positioned strategically across ridges and open fields. Smoke generators, fueled by kerosene and timed to release at specific intervals, simulated the exhaust of engines and the activity of troops. Soldiers moved among these constructs with deliberate slowness, hands adjusting dummies, checking angles, and ensuring that no shadow revealed the deception. Every motion had to replicate the natural behavior of a functioning military unit. Training for the soldiers of the Ghost Army went beyond the technical. They were taught to anticipate the perspective of the enemy. Reconnaissance planes would not fly at eye level. They would soar above, capturing the patterns of activity from angles that distorted depth and distance. Soldiers learned to exaggerate movements, to coordinate smoke plumes, and to ensure that the placement of dummies and inflatables created the correct optical illusions. Even the way shadows fell had to be considered, taking into account the rising sun, cloud cover, and terrain features. The physical demands were immense. Days began before sunrise and often ended long after nightfall. Soldiers worked in mud, rain, and wind, inflating tanks that weighed hundreds of pounds when bundled, dragging heavy wood frames, and maintaining generators that hissed and sputtered. Frost-covered mornings were common, and during storms, the work became nearly impossible. Yet morale remained high. There was a sense of pride in the invisible victories they were achieving, the knowledge that their labor could save thousands of lives on the front lines. The effectiveness of Britain's Ghost Army ultimately depended on one crucial factor: the enemy's perception. All the effort in constructing inflatable tanks, wooden artillery, and carefully posed dummies would have been meaningless if German reconnaissance could see through the illusion. Thus, understanding how the enemy observed the battlefield became central to operations. German reconnaissance was sophisticated and relentless. Planes regularly swept over southern England, taking photographs, recording troop movements, and noting the positions of armored divisions. Intelligence officers studied these images with precision, looking for inconsistencies or patterns that could reveal deception. The British, knowing this, treated each flyover as both a challenge and an opportunity. Every shadow, every plume of smoke, every arrangement of phantom tanks had to survive scrutiny from altitudes far above the ground. Photographic deception became a science. Soldiers learned how light and shadow transformed objects when captured from different angles. Inflatable tanks were positioned so that their proportions looked realistic from aerial photographs. Wooden artillery was painted in subtle tones to resemble real metal under varying light conditions. Smoke generators were timed to create wisps that suggested engine activity. Even the terrain itself, the undulations of fields, the patterns of dirt paths, and the tracks of vehicles, was considered in creating a convincing illusion. At the same time, radio deception complemented visual deception. Phantom units transmitted encrypted messages in patterns consistent with operational protocols. German signals intelligence intercepted these messages, interpreting them as coordination among real units. By combining visual and radio deception, the Ghost Army created a multi-dimensional illusion. The Germans were not merely fooled by what they saw. They were convinced that an entire army was active and alive, where, in reality, only empty fields and creative engineering existed. Civilian populations occasionally became unwitting participants in the deception. Farmers, villagers, and townspeople observed phantom units moving across fields, columns of smoke rising in the distance, and soldiers performing drills. Rumors spread, lending credibility to the illusion. While civilians were sometimes briefed to maintain secrecy, in many cases their belief in the authenticity of the troops helped reinforce the ruse. Every glance from a window, every story shared in a market became a subtle reinforcement of enemy misperception. The soldiers of the Ghost Army were acutely aware that even minor mistakes could unravel the operation. A deflated tank, a misaligned dummy, or an exposed rope could reveal the truth. They developed meticulous routines for inspection and maintenance, walking the fields repeatedly to ensure perfection. Engineers reinforced inflatables against wind, adjusted smoke machines to create natural-looking plumes, and reoriented dummies as sunlight shifted throughout the day. The work required both physical endurance and mental acuity. The strategic impact of these operations was profound. German commanders, relying on aerial photographs and intercepted communications, often allocated troops to defend against phantom attacks. Entire divisions were diverted, defensive positions reinforced where no attack would come, and resources misdirected. In many cases, these deceptions delayed German responses to actual Allied operations, buying critical time for real troop movements and logistical planning. One particularly successful exercise involved creating the illusion of a full division near a coastal town. Inflatable tanks lined the ridge, wooden artillery faced the water, and smoke curled upward in synchronized bursts. Reconnaissance planes captured images that, when analyzed in Berlin, suggested an impending amphibious assault. German intelligence prepared to counter this threat, moving units away from the true landing sites. The success of such operations demonstrated that the Ghost Army was not merely a novelty, it was a strategic instrument capable of influencing enemy decision-making at the highest levels. Soldiers also practiced rapid deployment and redeployment. Phantom units were designed to appear dynamic, moving across fields to suggest the shifting positions of real armies. Inflatable tanks were deflated, moved, and reinflated within hours. Wooden artillery could be repositioned with precision to maintain consistency with photographic and observational reports. These movements added credibility, reinforcing the illusion that the army was alive and active. The psychological toll on German commanders was notable. Constant surveillance revealed forces where none existed. Anticipated attacks never came. Units were tied down, defensive strategies misallocated, and confidence undermined. The Ghost Army's influence was subtle yet profound. It eroded certainty and forced the enemy to make decisions based on fabricated evidence. Meanwhile, the soldiers executing these operations developed a unique camaraderie. Their work demanded trust, coordination, and creativity. Teams collaborated to solve problems, share techniques, and refine illusions. Humor, ingenuity, and pride in their invisible victories kept morale high, even during long nights in cold mud. Unlike traditional combat units, their triumphs were measured not in enemy casualties, but in errors avoided and enemy movements manipulated. As the war progressed, the techniques of the Ghost Army evolved. Engineers experimented with new materials, radio operators refined their messaging, and soldiers mastered the choreography of smoke and movement. The combination of visual, auditory, and electromagnetic deception created layers of illusion that were increasingly difficult for the Germans to penetrate. Each success provided lessons that informed future operations, not only in Britain but across the Allied front. By mid-1943, the Ghost Army had become a cornerstone of British deception strategy. Large-scale exercises demonstrated the power of illusion to divert enemy resources and manipulate perception. The soldiers' invisible victories underscored a profound truth. In modern warfare, what the enemy believes can be as important as what is real. By turning imagination into a weapon, Britain reshaped the battlefield without firing a single shot. The impact of these operations was not confined to military planning. Civilians, observing the movements of phantom units, contributed to the illusion by reporting activity to local authorities, spreading rumors that reinforced German intelligence's misconceptions. The Ghost Army became a phenomenon that extended beyond the battlefield, influencing the perceptions of all who witnessed it directly or indirectly. Through meticulous planning, rigorous training, and daring execution, Britain's Ghost Army demonstrated that deception could achieve results equal to those of conventional combat. Inflatable tanks, dummy artillery, and staged maneuvers were more than props. They were instruments of strategy, capable of redirecting enemy forces, delaying attacks, and shaping the course of campaigns. Soldiers became architects of perception, engineers of illusion, and unsung heroes of a silent, invisible war. As Part 3 concludes, the Ghost Army had proven its effectiveness not only through the reactions of the enemy, but also through the refinement of techniques that would influence Allied operations across Europe. It was a testament to human ingenuity, patience, and the realization that in war, the mind could be as formidable as any weapon. As the war progressed and Allied operations advanced across Europe, the legacy of Britain's Ghost Army became increasingly clear. Though its soldiers had operated largely unseen, their efforts had far-reaching consequences. The illusions created in the fields of southern England had influenced decisions in Berlin, misdirected German forces, and bought the Allies precious time to prepare for the real battles to come. The Ghost Army had transformed the concept of deception from a minor tactic into a strategic weapon capable of shaping entire campaigns. Historians later examined the operations and marveled at their ingenuity. Inflatable tanks, dummy artillery, and simulated troop movements were not mere gimmicks, they were carefully designed instruments of psychological warfare. Each element, from the placement of smoke generators to the choreography of dummy soldiers, was calculated to manipulate enemy perception. Soldiers of the Ghost Army had become masters of illusion, engineers of belief, and silent architects of victory. The aftermath of their work extended beyond tactical advantages. Entire German divisions had been redeployed, defensive positions reinforced in anticipation of attacks that never occurred, and strategic planning disrupted. By the time Allied forces launched the Normandy landings, the Germans were already responding to phantom threats, misallocating resources, and preparing for assaults that were only figments of imagination. In this way, the Ghost Army had shaped the broader theater of war, saving countless lives and contributing to the eventual liberation of Europe. Reflections from those who served in these units reveal a deep pride in their unique role. Unlike conventional combat soldiers, they were rarely recognized for their contributions. Their victories were invisible, measured not in enemy casualties, but in the success of deception, the preservation of lives, and the strategic errors induced in the enemy. Many recalled nights spent in mud and rain, inflating tanks or adjusting dummies under the cover of darkness, knowing that their work might never be publicly acknowledged. Yet they understood its value, the silent power of turning illusion into reality. The psychological dimension of these operations cannot be overstated. By convincing the enemy of strength where none existed, the Ghost Army demonstrated that perception could rival physical force. The Germans, observing the carefully staged fields and receiving falsified radio transmissions, made decisions based on false premises. This created opportunities for the Allies to maneuver freely, exploiting enemy misjudgments and shaping the battlefield without engaging in direct combat. It was a testament to the subtle power of the mind in warfare. Moreover, the Ghost Army inspired subsequent Allied deception efforts. Lessons learned in Britain were applied to operations in North Africa, Italy, and across France. Inflatable tanks, wooden artillery, and coordinated illusions became tools for creating misdirection on a massive scale. The principles of camouflage, perception management, and controlled misinformation were incorporated into planning for major campaigns, demonstrating the enduring impact of Britain's early experiments in battlefield deception. The human ingenuity displayed in these operations reflected the creativity and adaptability of soldiers and engineers alike. Teams collaborated to solve practical problems, such as keeping inflatable tanks upright in windstorms or adjusting dummies under heavy rain. They developed new materials, refined deployment techniques, and devised strategies to maximize believability. Each innovation added a layer of sophistication to the illusion, ensuring that the Ghost Army remained a credible threat to enemy intelligence. Civilian contributions, too, played a subtle but important role. Villagers and townspeople observing phantom units or reporting activity helped reinforce the deception without ever knowing its full purpose. Their participation, though unintentional, amplified the effectiveness of the operations. The Ghost Army had become not just a military force, but a psychological network, leveraging perception, rumor, and observation to achieve strategic outcomes. By the end of the war, the Ghost Army had left a profound, if largely unrecognized, legacy. It exemplified the evolution of modern warfare, where information, perception, and psychological manipulation could achieve results as decisive as direct combat. The principles developed during these operations continue to influence military strategy today, underscoring the timeless truth that in war, what the enemy believes can be as important as what is physically present on the battlefield. In retrospect, the Ghost Army represents a unique chapter in military history. Its soldiers, operating in silence and obscurity, turned imagination into strategy and illusion into a weapon. Every inflated tank, every wooden artillery piece, every carefully choreographed movement contributed to victories that were never seen but had tangible effects on the course of the war. Their work reminds us that heroism is not always measured by blood or fire, but by the quiet, calculated brilliance that can change the course of events without a shot being fired. The story of Britain's Ghost Army is ultimately a story of human ingenuity, resilience, and the power of perception. It is a testament to the belief that even in the darkest hours, creativity and intelligence can reshape reality, giving hope and advantage to those willing to see beyond conventional warfare. As history looks back, the invisible victories of the Ghost Army stand as enduring proof that sometimes the most effective weapon is not one that destroys, but one that convinces the enemy that destruction is inevitable. In the shadowy fields of England, beneath mist and morning light, phantom tanks still stand in memory, silent witnesses to a war fought in shadows, smoke, and imagination. The Ghost Army of Britain had achieved what few armies could: victory without confrontation, triumph without recognition, and a lesson for generations to come, that in war, perception is as lethal as reality.